Okay, welcome back to Little Squirt the Fire Engine channel. So this is the big one. Gonna start officially installing the jakes here. So just to catch you up on what's been going on, we have the wiring installed. If you look closely here next to the engine block, sorry about the sun. You can see I've got the wiring coiled up and ready to go. I have to tell the truth, which is I actually have already done the driver's side. The jakes are already installed. I get stage fright, so I didn't want anyone watching me the first time I went through this, pointing out everything I did wrong. So I decided to do the first side off camera, and now we're on the second side, and I'm gonna give you a quick overview of exactly what's going on here. So first of all, as you can tell, and I'll do my best for the sun here. I'm really sorry. Do my best to kind of block it out, but so as you can tell, I had to get access to the valve cover here, and to do that I had to remove two pipes. One was the pipe from the manifold into the turbo, and the other one was the down pipe from the turbo out to the muffler. Those came off relatively easy. The down pipe was really stuck in there, so I had to really wrestle it to get it out. But eventually did get it out. And then the next thing to do was to remove the head cover, valve cover, pardon me. And so I did remove that. It's just two bolts. It comes out pretty easily. Lifted the valve cover off. And so this is what you have here with an unmolested Detroit diesel 6V92 electronic engine inside the head here. So, there's basically four parts, and each of the cylinders is the same. So here's the electronic injector. It's here and here. And I take that back. I should say three parts because this is technically one part here. So this round part here is the injector plunger, and this here is the electronic control for the injector. Then there's the valve train. So there's two rockers for the exhaust. So there's one here and one here. These are both for the exhaust. And then this here is for the to push down the injection plunger. And then finally we have our fuel jumpers, which are from here, and they just bring the fuel from the backside of the engine down into the injector. So now that we have access to everything, the first thing I've done is I have already loosened up the fuel lines. So we're going to take the fuel lines off and set them aside. And then when that's done, I'll come back and show you what the next step is. I should mention that this is absolutely not going to be a step-by-step video. If you want to see step-by-step up close with how everything goes in real time, there's a couple of excellent videos that I'll put down in the description. But this is just going to be an overview of the completion of each step so you can see exactly what happens. So I'll get to removing these fuel jumpers, and then we'll be back. Stay tuned. Alright, so yes, it is the next morning, which is why the sun is somewhere else. After I turned off the camera yesterday, I remembered to do something. So there's 4 drain holes in this head, and I plugged them each up. They're pretty big. They're big enough to stick your little finger into. And so I plugged them up with some rolled up paper to keep anything from falling down in there while we're working. The next thing we're going to do is take off the rocker assemblies. And we're going to take these bolts out. They are going to be replaced, so we'll just set them aside for now. And then the next step is we have to replace these valve bridges here. So I'll lift this up so you can see what I'm talking about. These are called valve bridges. They push down 2 of the exhaust valves at the same time, and we need to replace it with a new one. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the old one, and then I'll head over to the workshop and I'll show you how we prep the new ones. So just to show you a difference, we have an old valve bridge and a new valve bridge, and they're almost the same, with the exception of the fact that the new one is much wider on top. And the reason it's much wider is because we need space for the rocker for the exhaust for normal operation to push down in the middle, but then the jakes push down on the edge here. You can see this one, since this is used, it's got some marks in it where the previous jake brake was pressing down on it. So that's why we have to switch these. Now the trick is, you cannot put a wrench on these while they're in the engine, or you're going to bend the valve and you're going to wreck your engine. So the trick is, there's a special tool that's sold for this, but I'm using a vise that works just as well. So the trick is, you need to loosen these lock nuts in advance before you put them on to the onto the engine. This is the problem with having this and work out. Here we go. I'll loosen this one. Okay. Loosen this one. This one's tight. One more try. Polish engineering right here. All right, now let's give this a turn. Try and keep the whole table from turning if we can. There we go. That was easy. Okay, so that one's loosened. And then finally the third. There we go, that one wasn't so hard. Okay, now we have all of the lock nuts loosened. This is going to help us in just a minute when we go to set the valve lash on these. So let's head back over to the truck, install these, and then check the valve lash. Alright, so we're back over here at the engine, and unfortunately I tried to demonstrate the one all the way on the left. You can see it's already installed and my camera didn't work correctly, so I'm going to demonstrate the one in the middle. So what we've just done is we've loosened the bolts on the new valve bridges, and we're going to go ahead and install this so that we can check the lash. So what you need two pieces of feeler gauge for this, and I have one here that I cut into a very specific shape. You can see it has to fit in this little notch here, and then the other one is just a regular piece of feeler gauge. So what we need to do is we need to put the little piece under the back, and I'll flip these up out of the way so it's easier to work on. You need to put the little piece of feeler gauge in the back. Underneath the valve bridge in the little slot. Make sure that's in there nicely. Now you press down on the top of the bridge and you check the lower valve to make sure that it's got some nice, not nice but not too tight. Okay, so this is really loose. There's no friction whatsoever. Shoot, left my tools over in the garage. I'll be right back. All right, back with my tools. So the next thing we're going to do, we're going to tighten the screw down. I'm going to put the feeler gauge under the front valve, and we're going to tighten the screw down ever so slightly until there's some friction. Starting to get a little friction there. That feels good. Whoop, that's too much. All right. Hold this down, press it down just to make sure. And it's a little too much. Let's back it off just a little bit. There we go, that's good. So now my feeler gauge in front, it's got a little bit of friction, but not much. Smooth. And so now what I'm going to do, I'm going to ever so slightly tighten down the lock nut with my wrench, ever so slightly, just enough to keep it from moving. I'm not going to wrench on this really hard while it's on the engine at the risk of bending the valves. So I'm just going to snug it up, try and keep the screw in the same place. Just a little bit. Okay, there we go. So now what I'll do is I will once again remove the valve bridge, take it back to the workbench. Whoops, this is the fun part when you lose those little feeler pieces. God knows where they go. Whoops, almost got it. Okay. Got it. So now what I'll do is I'll take this back to the workbench, I'll torque it down to spec, and then once it's all set, bring it back, install it back in here, check the lash one more time to make sure I torqued it down, or to make sure I, did it correctly, and then we'll move on to the next one. So we'll take a break from the filming, and I'll come back once the other two bridges are installed, and we'll move on to the next step. Now the next step is to reinstall the fuel pipes. Now fortunately, the kit that I bought came with the correct fuel pipes, came with the new fuel pipes. Fortunately, these later engines, the 6V92 in particular, come with reversible fuel pipes. So originally they were like this, and if you turn them around 180 degrees, now they will support the installation of the jake brakes without having to make any changes. So those extra fuel pipes, I'll probably just recycle them. I don't really need them, or if anyone wants them, just send a message. I'll just ship them to you if you really want them. So I'm going to start by tightening these down finger tight, just to make sure that they go in smoothly. This one's giving me a little trouble. Let's be gentle to it. Okay, and then we're going to torque these down to 14 foot-pounds. Whoops. Now, if you're wondering, I'm using a crow's foot wrench to do this. And this is hard to do with greasy gloves. As long as the crow's foot attachment is 90 degrees to the wrench, the torquing will be correct. If it's in any other direction, you're going to mess up your torque. You're going to not set the torque correctly. All right. Now this is the fun part. The top ones are fun, by which I mean not fun because it's impossible to get the wrench in. All right, there we go. So the first fuel pipe is done. I'm going to pause the video. I'm going to do the other 5 fuel pipes, and then we'll come back to the next step. All right, so now we have all of the fuel jumpers in place, and we're ready to start installing our jake housing. So for this model, the jake housing with the solenoid goes in the middle, and then the 2 without the solenoids go on either side. And this thing here is the solenoid. Obviously, it's easy to tell. You'll see when I bring the other ones out, it's easy to tell that this black cylinder here, the others don't have that. So first thing I'm going to do is get all of the valve bridge train back in place here. Make sure we're basically lined up. I might need to get something to line these up first. Come on, you. Yeah, I'm gonna have to get something to line up these holes. Stand by. Now they're lined up. I'm just going to hand tighten them in for now. You know, I gotta say, there's nothing like the feel of a really good machined bolt. Just the way it tightens down easily with fingers. Just kind of slides in there. It feels great. It feels like someone put a lot of care and attention into making this the right way. That's why I love these old engines. Do I have an alignment problem? Perhaps. Let's see. There we go. That should fix it. Sorry about any airplane noise. I think I mentioned we live near the airport, and so on certain days it's just a non-stop parade of airliners. So the next steps that we're going to do, I'm going to tighten these bolts down with a with a ratchet, just until they're just really at the bottom. I'm really not going to tighten them at all. I'm just going to put them in all the way. And then the next thing to do, which is a little tricky, is we have to adjust these oil screws here. So you can see there's a bolt here, or a screw. I guess it's technically a bolt, but I think they call them oil screws. So there's three parts here. There's the screw, there's a little rubber gasket right there. I don't know if you can see it sticking out, and then there's a lock nut. And so what you have to do is you have to kind of simultaneously start tightening up the hold down bolts while you're also aligning the oil screw to the rubber gasket. And it just takes a little bit of doing, tightening, loosening, adjusting, unadjusting. So I'm going to do that off camera. I will say one thing though, for anyone who's interested in doing this, these little rubber gaskets, you really got to get a new one when you install the Jakes. If they did come with an old one, it's probably going to be brittle, damaged, cracked. I started looking around to try and figure out where to get these from, and found some places online that sold diesel parts, and the upfront price of the O-rings looked reasonable, but when you went to check out, they're adding in $100, $200, $300 worth of shipping, which is ridiculous because, I mean, you could stick these in an envelope and put a stamp on them and they'll get there just fine. So what I wound up doing, I found the local Detroit diesel dealership in our area. And in our case, it was Interstate Power Systems, of which there's many of those around the country. And they were actually able to order these from the factory, brand new, and have them sent to the store for no cost, or sent to their shop for no cost. So I placed the order, waited about 5 days. 5 days later, drove over there and picked them up. And they were cheap. They were $5 a piece, which for O-rings, you're like, oh, that's expensive. It's really not. For a custom O-ring for this specific application, $5 a piece is a steal, especially with no shipping. So if you do, look up we're fortunate that we just live one town away from Interstate Power, so it was really easy to drive over there. Take a look. I mean, if you're going to order these, and this is the difference between, paying $100 in shipping or getting, just having to drive a little bit to pick it up, go check out your Detroit diesel dealership and they will sell you these. Okay, so cheapskate speech over. I'm going to go ahead, like I said, start adjusting these, snugging them down, lining up the oil jumpers and tightening those down. Once everything is tightened down, I'll come back and show you the next step. Okay, through the magic of television, the housings are now installed. They have been tightened, torqued down to the correct spec, all 6 bolts, and the oil screws here have been extended and the lock nuts have been locked down. So if you're curious about these oil screws, so basically what happens, and there's a lot of other videos that explain this much more succinctly than I can, but just to tell you about it real quick. So these bolts have oil passages in them. And so what happens is, in order to activate the Jake brakes, this solenoid opens up a little port so that the oil passages can fill up this housing with oil. And that's what creates the hydraulic lock needed to engage the brake. These little oil screws here, the reason they're called oil screws is because they jump the oil from this master housing into the drone housings. So why they're connected like this is so that the oil can flow through the screws, through the solenoid, and out into the drone housings. The next part of the video is tuning up the engine. So we've taken apart all the lifters and everything. We've really jacked everything up inside here as far as the engine is concerned. So we need to do a tune-up on the engine. And the tune-up consists of three things. First is adjusting the injector timing. Second is, and that's the injector here. Let me get my little... Do I have a screwdriver to use? No, I don't. So there's this channel I really like called Bending with Brendan. He does frame repair for trucks, and he's got a pointer that's got a little finger on the end of it. I wish I had one of those right now. But anyways, I'll just use my real finger. So step one is to time the injector. Step two is to adjust the valve lash. So for the exhaust exhaust valves. So there's one there and one there. And then the final thing is to adjust the lash on the Jake brake, which is used with this little screw and this nut here. The strange thing with this is it calls that the lash calls to be adjusted, calls for 64 thousandths of an inch of lash between the Jake and the bridge. And there's really no such thing as a 64 thousandth feeler gauge. So I know one of the inspirations for this, for me doing this, was Caleb Matzke of Matzke Diesel out of Wisconsin. He used a, what's it called? It was just on the tip of my tongue. It's like a gauge. Hold on. I can't think of it right now. I'm going to put the name here at the bottom. So that's what he used. I don't have one of those. But what I do have is two 32 thousandths feeler gauges that I'm going to stack together. And I did that on the other side, and that worked out really well. The other thing is I don't have a tool to bar the engine over, and I actually don't even have it. I mean, let me put it this way. The crankshaft is like way down there behind the fan, and there's about an inch of clearance between the fan and not the crankshaft, but the crank pulley. You can't fit anything in there. And so I guess there's a special tool you can buy. Of course, there's a special tool that you can buy to bar the engine over. I'm not going to worry about that. I'm just going to use the starter to nudge it over. So, long story short, this as a new mechanic, this was a frustrating process for me doing it on the other side. It took a long time and a lot of concentration. And there are other excellent resources where you can go to see how this is done in detail. So I'm just going to do it off camera, and I'll come back when we're done, and I'll show you what the next step is. Okay, so now we have tuned up the engine, the exhaust valves, the injectors, and the Jake lash. Usually at this point what I would do is I would go ahead and start the engine up, and then you can push on this solenoid with your finger to activate the Jakes just to make sure everything works correctly. I have a little problem though. I'm standing in a confined area with the turbo exhaust pointing right in my face and a deafening open header right at my chest level. So, if I were a manlier man, I might go ahead and do it, but I value my ears and my lungs, so I'm going to assume that these work correctly, and I'm going to proceed with the rest of the installation. So the next part of the installation, to be honest, when I did the other side, it was one of my least favorite. It sucked. It was a pain in the butt. So on the mechanical engines, there is a hole in the head right here that's meant to run this Jake wire through. In this DDEC electronic engine, you can see there's no such hole. But what there is there is a harness, a pass-through, a rubber grommet, if you will, for the injectors. And lo and behold, I don't know if you can see this, but there's a plug for a fifth that's plugging up a fifth hole in the grommet. So, well, that's lucky. So maybe they put that there intentionally for Jakes, or maybe I just got lucky. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out, get a pair of needle nose pliers. I'm going to pull out this plug. And then, honestly, I'm sure there's a better way to do this, but I don't know what it is. I wound up just sticking a coat hanger through there, greasing it up, sticking a coat hanger through there, and tying, hooking it up to this 12 gauge cable and pulling the whole thing through. And again, it wasn't very elegant, but it got the job done. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. I'm going to pull out this plug, going to figure out a way to get this wire through, and then the last step will be running the wire in, zip tying it up, and then putting a terminal on it and connecting it to the solenoid. So we're going to do that now, and we'll be back when that's all done.
2 hours later.
So as I expected, it was a complete pain in the butt, including breaking a coat hanger and messing up the grommet, which I had to put back together with zip ties. Yeah, so that part's not very fun. If anyone knows of a better way to bring a cable through a rubber grommet like that, let me know. The trick is that the plug only plugs the outside, like 1/4 of an inch, but then there's a really thick, solid piece of rubber through the middle that you have to somehow make it through. So if anyone's got a better idea on how to do that in the future, put it in the comments. So as you can see, everything's back together here. The cable for the Jake is all connected. So now really the only thing we have left to do is put everything back together.